All right, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to give individuals a few seconds to come in. We just opened up, and so I see the participant tracker going up. So I'm just going to give people a few more seconds. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Michelle Horth, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. And on behalf of the Harris School of Public Policy here at the University of Chicago, I'd like to welcome you all to our event tonight. The Harris School is proud to host several events over the coming weeks in honor of Black History Month. The series brings together prominent speakers, activists, scholars, community members, and the U Chicago faculty, staff, and students. The events seek to facilitate meaningful conversations about history, progress, and opportunities. And our hope is that with each event, our participants learn something new. We successfully create a platform to elevate voices that often go unheard, and we find new ways to celebrate and honor the richness of Black history. Tonight, we have an amazing panel discussion on Black mayors leading America's cities. Moderating this discussion tonight for us will be Mr. Derek Douglas, who's Vice President of Civic Engagement and External Affairs here at the university. He leads the university's local, national, and international urban development and civic engagement efforts. We are also joined by such a fantastic panel, and we could all be in the same space to appreciate the energy that's probably in this room. But we have Mayor Michael Nutter, who served as mayor of Philadelphia, Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson, who served as mayor in Gary, Mayor Michael Tubbs, whose term just ended in Stockton, California, but most importantly to note is that his election made him the nation's youngest mayor ever to be elected in a town of 100,000 people or more, and was Stockton's first African-American mayor. And then last but certainly not least, Mayor Stephen Reed, who's the current mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. I am going to now turn this over to Derek Douglas, but I do want the audience members to know that we will have the opportunity to engage in Q&A, but because we have such a large group with us, the best way to do that is through your Q&A function that's part of Zoom. As the conversation starts, please feel free to go ahead and start shooting those questions our way, and we will try and get to as many of them as possible. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Derek Douglas, and I'm gonna exit stage left.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to moderate a panel with such distinguished panelists who have accomplished so much for their cities and for their communities, and are continuing every day to find ways in which to improve the lives of people in this country. For those who don't know, before I took the job at the University of Chicago as Vice President for Civic Engagement and External Affairs, and in that role, I actually serve as the lead the office and the work that interacts with the city of Chicago and drives a lot of our activities on the south side of Chicago. But before I did that, I used to work in the White House for President Obama in the first term, where I was on the Domestic Policy Council and I was in charge of urban policy. And in that role, my charge was to work with the president and those in the administration to develop a strategy for how the federal government could be a better partner to cities and to metropolitan areas. And so one of the primary audiences that I had for my work, and one of the primary collaborators that we had, were mayors. And through that work, and that's where I got to know Mayor Nutter, and I got to meet Mayor Wilson. Mayor Tubbs and Mayor Reed were not mayor at the time when I was in the White House, but have gotten to meet them since. Through that work, I just got a tremendous appreciation for the job and the role that a mayor has. I mean, the mayor, you're the most essential leaders for your cities. You have to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in your communities. You have to create a vision that responds to the needs of your constituents. You got to deal with the potholes and the snow removal at the same time. And I think that it's hard to find an elected official that's closer to the needs of the people than a mayor, in my opinion. And so we're really delighted to have this panel with 4 African-American mayors on Black History Month to talk about their experiences and some of the issues. I would be remiss if I didn't also just mention the history of African-American mayors in this country and how really the leadership is, was born out of the movement through the Civil Rights Act and the civil rights work in the 60s. And some of the early Black mayors like Maynard Jackson in Atlanta or here in Chicago, Harold Washington, who were path breaking, and some of the early Black mayors. And today, I saw a statistic that more than 1/3 of America's top 100 cities are governed by African-American mayors. So if you think about where we were, for a lot of you, you're the first African-American mayor in your city. I think Mayor Nutter was maybe the second or the third, but it was third, but it was very close. But to think about where we were to where we are now, where you're seeing more and more African-American leaders leading their cities, I think it's a tremendous testament to you all, your vision and what you're bringing to the table. So it's a pleasure for me to host. So let's jump right in with some questions. And this first question, I want to pose it to all of you. And we'll start maybe with Mayor Freeman-Wilson, and then we can go to, I'll just call each of you, but I want to first get your general views about, the issue that's been, the 2 issues really that have been dominating the nation for the last year. Some have called them the twin pandemic. The first being COVID-19. Mayor Reed, you're in the office now. Mayor Tubbs, you were mayor when this was going on. But if there's anything that COVID-19 has done, it's done a lot, but one of the things it has really done is magnify the health, economic, educational, and social disparities of low-income communities, small businesses, and people of color, a lot of whom live in the cities that you all lead or have led. At the same time, stemming from the George Floyd, which really, and the other killings that happened, the consciousness around racial injustice and economic injustice in our country came to the fore. And there's been some effort and conversation about how we need to develop solutions to address those issues. So I'm wondering if you both, from where you sit, some of you mayors, some of you no longer mayors, but working on these issues in different forms, could just give your general sense about, what do we need to do to think about making progress on these issues of inequality that are magnified by COVID-19, racial and social injustice in the country? What role do mayors play, do cities play in helping to address these issues? Mayor Freeman-Wilson, just general observations and thoughts that you've had over the last year or so as relates to these issues. You're on mute.
Let's unmute first. First, I want to thank the Harris School for assembling this event and allowing me to join with my colleagues who I have the utmost respect for, and certainly to have Derek as the moderator. This is clearly a challenging time for cities all across the country. And a lot of times, and certainly Mayor Nutter gets it, and Mayor Tubbs, you will get used to this. People ask, do you miss being mayor? And on one hand, there are times that I say yes, but when you look at the challenges that our colleagues are facing, it's not so much. Certainly, everybody likes to solve hard problems and to face difficult challenges and to assemble teams around them and to think about how to address them. And I would suggest to you that the mayors that are now facing those issues, starting with Mayor Lightfoot and then going all around the country, particularly the African American mayors are in the best position to deal with that. And certainly Mayor Reed knows that, because you will not find mayors who feel the concerns and who see the concerns and who see them from a very personal perspective, any more than Mayor Reed and all of the mayors who are currently serving. But it's almost a being between a rock and a hard place. And that's because you understand the critical nature of the challenges, of the racial injustice that we've faced for centuries, of the impact of the pandemic on Black and Brown communities, and the limitations that you have as mayor, and the need to have a partner at the state and the federal level. You get it from all sides. You know, you're not doing enough. You're not speaking to this in a great enough way. And so I would say that, you know, I understand the urgency of it, and I know that all mayors do, but I think it's even more of a challenge for Black mayors.
Thank you. Mayor Nutter, general thoughts on these issues around?
Well, first, much like Mayor Freeman-Wilson, I also want to say thank you just to be invited, certainly to you, Derek, and your leadership, and our president, our dean, Dean Baker. And, you know, I get the opportunity to work with her and some of the team as a fellow at the Harris School. You know, Mayor Freeman-Wilson got it correctly right. Now, I get asked also, do you miss it? My answer is, I miss my people. I miss the folks that I worked with. It really, as you well know, Derek, from your time in the White House, it is like a family. You know, the projects, the activities, the ups and downs, et cetera, et cetera. But I have also shaken my head from time to time. You know, 7 of my 8 years in office were with President Obama. And so I know what it means to have a great president in the White House. I know what it means to know people like yourself and Valerie Jarrett and Cecilia and Susan and you know, so many others, people doing like serious work and trying to get serious stuff done, David Agnew and all those guys, and other people. So first, I mean, you think about just last year, I mean, you know, 2016 was 2016, and the switch from, you know, what it was like to have a President Obama who actually wanted to govern, liked the job, wanted to do some things. The Office of Intergovernmental Affairs stayed in touch with so many of us on a regular basis, the cabinet secretaries, et cetera, et cetera. At one time, I think I could say this, I had this, I said to somebody on the team, you know, I have a daytime job, right? I mean, you know, I can't be on these calls with y'all every day, right? But I mean, they're trying to be helpful, but like, I got other stuff to do, right? But always helpful. And to then be in a situation like, you know, Mayor Tubbs and Mayor Reed, with somebody in the White House who has no idea what they're doing, no governing, no interaction, no contact, and is actually fighting with cities. And in opposite, tweeting and making statements and all this other kind of crazy stuff. So, you know, I had the Great Recession. Mayor Freeman-Wilson did as well. We had SARS, we had Ebola, we had some other things. We had protests. We had, you know, Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and, you know, Sandy Hook. And I mean, all kinds of things happened. But 2020, you had a worldwide pandemic, first time since 1918, in a serious way. Another recession. Some places hadn't recovered from the 08, 9, 10, 11 recession, and back into that. The civil unrest that some would say, and Chicago is often looked at, in Philly and Newark and other places, Gary, hadn't seen that kind of level of protest, sustained protests since '68, and a presidential election. A pandemic, stay-at-home orders, quarantine, masks, And even in '08, 9, and 10, we didn't have people dying. So you see these mayors out here dealing with fiscal distress, but giving daily reports of how many people are sick and how many people died. And people rely on them for that information because you're getting madness out of the White House. The only other place you can really turn is to your local mayor. So as you said, closest to the people. And they still expect, notwithstanding all this other stuff, did you pick up my trash? Does the street light work? What about my kids? Are they getting an education? Going to school, not going to school, et cetera, et cetera, whether you're in charge or not. Because the mayor is actually responsible for everything. Even when it's not on you, right? There's no job description, right? It's like, you're here, I pay my taxes, I expect service. So I just think it's a different environment. Things have changed so much in 5 to 10 years, and I lift these mayors up because they're in a totally different environment. I'll close with this on this part. Facebook and Twitter were like 2 years old when I came into office. I mean, I didn't even understand it then. We finally kind of caught up with it, but now, I mean, people are governing with these platforms and chasing after you morning, noon, and night. You say something, at 10 a.m. and at 10 o'clock and 15 seconds, the world knows about it. So it's very, very different.
Thank you. Mayor Reed, let me go to you because you're in the heart of it right now, and you've actually gained some national attention for your response to COVID because you've been trying to lead these efforts in a city where you have a governor who's opposed to doing these things. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been approaching the issue? How have you navigated that tension of needing to serve your community through this crisis when you are in a state that has been resistant to the science and the other things that are calling for change? You're on mute as well.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel of mayors and leadership leading cities big and small. I think that for the Harris School of Public Policy to put this on, it gives us an opportunity to combine what's being discussed in academia with the practitioners who are on the ground, either having done it or trying to do it now. So that in itself is a great vantage point for me because I like the knowledge sharing. I like to hear those that have been in this position and those that are in it as well, just to kind of pick their brains a little bit in terms of what things were like and what things are going, how things are going in their community. I think for me and my space, it's like a lot of mayors, in particular, I think mayors who are representing urban centers, but whose state politics run counter to that. And we've had to navigate that from the standpoint of who do we represent and who am I in charge to look out for. And what we've tried to do has been to set the tone and to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, and to lead with a clear and concise and level of clarity in terms of why we're doing what we're doing as it relates to the science, as it relates to the experts and those that are obviously well-versed in this, much like we would think that we're well-versed in some other areas of our profession. And what we tried to do from day one has been to take the politics out of it. Now, because we tried to do that, obviously doesn't mean that we were successful in doing that. But I think because we've been consistent, about that, it has allowed us to be a lot more effective as leaders, and it's allowed our message to be seen through that lens of objectivity, whether you agree with it or not. And my thing has been from the very start of this, I'm going to present the facts to you. I'm going to lead in the best way that I know how. And it's going to be consensus building. Yes, it's going to be trying to get everybody on board, certainly playing cheerleader, but also playing coach. And, sometimes when you're the coach, you have to tell people what play we're going to run, whether they like it or not. And you live with that, and you understand that there are people in the cheap seats who think they can make a better decision. That's fine. That's what talk radio is for. That's what social media is for, and so be it. But I try to block out the noise, and what we tried to do has been to validate our decisions based on information and knowledge that I've gained through, talking with other mayors who've been through previous circumstances like this. Mayor Nutter brought up SARS and Ebola. Tubbs and I and others have been on some chat groups as well, just trying to see, hey, what are you doing? What's working here? What messaging it has kind of backfired on you? And guys have said, ladies have said, hey, you may want to hold off on this. Make sure you get some other folks on board before you do that. And that has been very helpful. And I think for our position here in Montgomery, relative to our state politics, we're, as most people know, in the heart of the deep red South, although Georgia changed that. Thank God for them and all my friends in Atlanta and Augusta and Columbus and everywhere else, Savannah and others, for helping to change that. But, what we tried to do has been to really set the example. And I think for our position, the example that we set has proven over the last year plus to be the best example. And we've garnered the respect of even some of our political opponents because of how we've operated and the way we stayed the course. And I think doing that along with building those coalitions has been very helpful by far to the public and to their overall well-being, even more so, and maybe even at the expense of some of my political favorability, which is fine. You have ups and downs with that. But the main thing is, can you honestly say that I made the best decision for my city and for my residents? And as long as I can do that, I'm fine, because I've been very coy, very coy about how the state has followed some of our positions after the decisions that we made. So that's been an interesting ride, even if termed different, even if communicated a little differently. That's been kind of interesting to see. So we don't have quite the gap that we had at one point. We're a lot closer now, because I think that we were out front. We used the right rationale for why we made the decisions, and it's been for the betterment of our residents. And certainly we're still trying to do that through this vaccination implementation that's going on right now.
Great. And they say imitation is the highest form of flattery.
Right.
So when you see these folks who are against it follow your lead with a different name, that's all you need to know in terms of you're on the right track. Mayor Tubbs, want to get your general thoughts, if you have any, on COVID and how you dealt with it, what may have worked, but also really interested in having you share with the audience the work you've done to fight poverty, in particular the universal basic income, which you've become, a national leader on and piloted or implemented that program. If you could speak to any general thoughts you want to share on COVID and your work on that as mayor, but in particular, your fight against poverty and how the universal basic income has been playing out, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And just briefly, let me say thank you. I feel like I'm at church, when everybody got to get up and say thank you to everyone. So thank you, give honor to God, all that good stuff. And let me just say on the part about mayors, and the audience has the treat of hearing from sort of three leader mayors or leader politicians, with leader being first. Because I think what differentiates the mayors of the caliber of Mayor Freeman-Wilson, Mayor Reed, and Mayor Nutter is that they're leaders first. And that requires taking unpopular but principled stances and really thinking sort of beyond a 4-year or even an 8-year election cycle. So I just want to honor them for their work, their sacrifices, their leadership, and their example. I've learned so much from all of them. And I think the COVID was really interesting for a variety of reasons. As Mayor Reed can attest, 2020 was just a crazy year to be a mayor. Because you weren't just a mayor, you were the public health commissioner. You were the board of supervisors. You was the president. I was a procurement officer. I was trying to find masks in China. In fact, it was the things I had to do on a daily basis while not knowing anything. I didn't take many science classes in college, right? So just learning about this virus and how to communicate this virus. And it wasn't my state legislature, Mayor Reed. It was my board of supervisors, where all the public health dollars go, that just thought I don't know what world they lived in. I had to fight them for testing, for masks. Anyway, I do not miss that at all, but my heart is broken because now there's no one fighting for the immigrant workers in my community. There's no one fighting for the essential workers, and the sheriff's not doing any enforcement. Cases are going up. Our ICUs have been at zero capacity for 2 months. It's just, and then the county is diverting $70 million of CARES Act money to the sheriff's office, who refuses to enforce COVID rules. It's a mess. I feel terrible. At least back then I could pack a punch, but now I have to do other things. But what was interesting, Derek, about COVID-19 and the way it married with the Black Lives Matter protest, it reminded me of kind of where I learned about basic income from. Because I learned it from studying Dr. King, who, as Mayor Nutter mentioned, 1968, 67 being these time of racial unrest. And that was also the same time Dr. King wrote, Where Do We Go From Here? And during that time, there's like 200 protests in cities. And he looked out on that and saw guaranteed income as a solution. So it was literally, our pilot was supposed to wrap up in July of last year. We were able to extend it to this January. But then I also was able to talk to a bunch of mayors about how do we make this an issue that's responsive to what we're seeing with the economic deprivation of COVID-19, but also to the cries for racial justice, because folks ain't just crying about ending police brutality, which is a necessity, but we're also talking about we need jobs, we need opportunity, we need a level playing field, we need an income floor. So to that end, we started a group called Mayors for Guaranteed Income. And now we have 35 mayors across this country who are piloting or going to pilot a guaranteed income in their cities, but one that's not rooted in ideas about displacement and robots, which is important, but one that first and foremost is deeply rooted in civil rights, is deeply rooted in notions of Black Lives Matter, and deeply rooted in an understanding that the fundamentals have to work today before we can get to tomorrow. And I think to finish off, that's the beauty of mayors, is that because I mean, a city can't do a guaranteed income for everyone. And in fact, some of the backlash I faced in Stockton was because we weren't doing everyone, because we only did 125 people when 315,000 people needed it. And the federal government has to step up. But in the absence of the federal government, of a functioning federal government, or as a federal government, it's so hard to move nationally. It's always been mayors who've been pushing the envelope. I'm sure Mayor Freeman-Wilson, Mayor Nutter, and Mayor Reed could talk about things they've been doing in their cities because no one else would, and someone had to. And I think us piloting guaranteed income is in that same vein.
Terrific. And you spoke about forming coalitions, and I also wanted to mention, I meant to do it at the opening, to thank the African American Mayors Association, who's also partnering with us to put on this event, has done very important work in building those coalitions.
Stephanie's doing a fantastic job there.
Fantastic job. I'm following up on this, and there's been,
Absolutely.
I've been looking a little bit at some of the chats, and a question that came up, and I want to start with you, Mayor Nutter. Others may have a chime on it, but it's kind of moving to the, what do we do about some of these issues? And you wrote a piece in June, a very powerful thought piece about police killings of Black Americans and time to wake up and live up to our founding principles. You know, if you had one or two things that you thought we could be doing at the federal level or at the local level to start to address inequality and racial injustice in our communities, what would you do? What would you do? What would you recommend?
Well, it's a couple of things. And certainly when you talk about criminal justice reform, I mean, Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson is the expert on this panel on those issues, but share some thoughts. For me, it always starts with, you have to acknowledge and admit that there is a problem in the first place. And, you know, if you, and I want to try to talk about very quickly both sides of this issue about criminal justice reform and violence, police, officer involved shootings, but also the shootings that take place on our streets that have nothing to do with the police department. You know, the mayor, you know, while he or she may be technically or directly in charge of the police, the criminal justice system, to the extent that anybody can call it a system, as opposed to a series of players who happen to interact with each other, it's not a system. The mayor's got the police, the courts are separate and have their own thing. The DA is doing his or her own thing. and then probation and parole or bail, and right. So you have all of these, and no one of those players can tell another player what to do. So a lot of it, from my perspective, is based on, I think Mayor Tubbs used the word, it's about coalition building, it's about relationships, it's about getting people reasonably to sit around a table and say, what are we trying to do? Now, amazingly, because of COVID, again, which has highlighted every deficiency in every system that exists, we suddenly realized that, oh, apparently everybody doesn't need to be in jail, because we needed to let a whole bunch of folks out of jail because of COVID-19. So, for years we've been talking about mass incarceration, too many people in jail. And now suddenly we've, over the past, 8, 9, 10 months, we can depopulate because we're afraid that people are going to get sick or die. Okay. Are we going to go back to that system whenever one day somebody says, COVID-19 is over? So we had to figure out new and different solutions. Oh, we're not going to arrest everybody. Oh, over the years, we've seen cities mostly leading the charge on decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana. States then jumped in and, well, if all the cities are doing that, and we can make some money, why don't we legalize it, either for medical or, recreational? So I think we would miss a significant moment if we don't come out of this and put everything on the table for conversation. Yes, there is systemic racism. Why is it that Black people often do not survive an encounter with the police under a variety of circumstances, when in many instances, these folks, when you really think about it, haven't done that much. George Floyd died about a $20 counterfeit bill. Jacob Blake, now they say, may have had a weapon in the car, but he didn't get shot in the car. That was on the outside, right? In all of these instances, it's usually about nothing in the whole scheme of things. And so, why do these things continue to happen? You have 18,000 police departments in the United States of America, all with different standards, all with different use of force criteria, all with different training, right? So I am very hopeful in the Biden administration that we would start to set, some standards and guidelines, help departments do things, and then again figure out if somebody has broken the law. We're a nation of laws. Okay, fine. You have to pay a price for that. It does not necessarily mean that you need to be locked up. And it doesn't mean that you should sit somewhere in a pretrial environment for months and months and months without ever getting to an adjudication to your situation. And lastly, even in bad neighborhoods, everybody in a bad neighborhood is not a criminal. And so helping police officers to understand, that's my neighborhood. That's where I live, and that's where I want to live. And the fact that some folks who break the law happen to live here does not automatically criminalize my behavior as I'm walking down the street or driving my car. Mm-hmm. And so I think it starts with some honesty and some real talk, and then action.
No, that's helpful. I know, talking about the hopes for the Biden administration, our chief of police, the university, we have a police department. Our chief, Kenton Rainey, often talks about the work under the Obama administration on 21st century policing, mm-hmm. and some of the work and principles that they created. Building on that could be a template. Mayor Wilson, I want you to jump in on this issue about what do we do, and speak also from your time. You're the head of the Urban League, which is one of the leading organizations in Chicago working on some of these issues. What are your thoughts about what can we do for those listening? They're looking for ideas, policies. What can we be doing to address inequality in our neighborhoods?
So I just want to pick up on your mention of the 21st Century Policing Report, because what it really says to the Biden administration, and quite frankly to departments all over the country, is that the blueprint still already exists. You don't have to build it, you don't have to create it. And I think that if you look at the members of that task force, Chuck Ramsey was one of the leaders. The former head of CJA, Lori her name Robinson,
Sure.
was also a co-chair.
Right.
And it was an even-handed group. Black Lives Matter was represented there. And they came up with recommendations for the community, for police, for everyone to follow. And I would say that one of those things that we have to look at is a universal standard for force. There's so many departments. There's so many people that are confused, quite frankly, about what should be and what shouldn't be. We really do have to approach a universal standard. But I would say that the other thing to pull us back a little is to look at the recommendations that were made over 50 years ago, because this isn't just a law enforcement, public safety, community restoration issue. It really does go back to the issues of race and poverty and economics that all of us have been dealing with during our time as mayor, and that the Kerner Commission dealt with over 50 years ago. We need to pull that back out and dust it off and look at the recommendations, because some were followed, most were not. And I would dare say that all are still relevant today.
Yeah, we have a foundation to start with. We got to go back.
Yes.
Oftentimes when you're doing policy, I remember this when I was in the White House, you get in there and you want to reinvent the wheels. You want to create your thing. And instead you can look back and see, what have we done before? What has been said before that we could build on or maybe adapt or adopt?
Yeah. Goodyear is not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're just trying to make a better one.
That's trying to make a better one. So I'm going to be
exactly right.
integrating now some of the questions that are coming in from the audience, but and as well as my own spin. I want to address this one to first Mayor Reed and then Mayor Tubbs. And we're seeing now, you know, we saw what happened on January 6th. And I think it's what awoken the consciousness of America around extremism and the risk of domestic terrorism and whatnot. And, you know, a question came up about how do you deal with that, or how are you preparing for that in your respective cities and communities? You know, you're there, Mayor Reed in Montgomery, and can you speak to where does this issue or this threat, where is that on your kind of list of things that worry you when you go to bed at night? And how are you thinking about or preparing for trying to address this issue?
Well, you know, you got to keep in mind that for me, this is somewhat, you know, history repeating itself. So being in Montgomery, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's house was bombed with his family in it, I have to remind people that this isn't new to people in the Black community in particular. When we think about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and 4 little girls, this isn't new. And so it is a type of hate speech that was allowed to go unchecked by many in political leadership, corporate leadership, and across the board that led to this point of what we see, you know, what we saw on January the 6th. And I think, you know, how the government responds to those who are involved is going to be very important as well. Because what we try to do here in the city is, again, not live in the past, but we always want to be mindful of it. And when you have the Equal Justice Initiative, which is headed by Brian Stevenson, and this lynching museum that we have here, lynching memorial that we have here, it's important that people understand the level of domestic terrorism and the level of law enforcement and mob behavior that has been exhibited throughout this country's history. You know, last year, a lot of people found out about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street. Not something that many people were familiar about, probably outside of certain spaces. And so what we saw on January the 6th, I think, was just the unprecedented breach of that being taken out on the democracy itself. And what we try to share with our community is that it's not enough just to talk about it. You have to act. And you cannot be silent when these things are happening, because you don't know how far people will go or how far people will push it. And so what we've shared, not just only internally in my administration, is that one, there's a zero tolerance for certain types of speech and behavior that we will have among anybody, not just our law enforcement, but anybody in the administration. But also what we are trying to do here in Montgomery is to, again, remind people that things that you think are in the past, why are we talking about this? Why can't you just let that go? Why do you have to bring that up? Because it's still relevant, and because it is still in existence. And we act like this was in some prior century, or that people weren't alive. And it's not until you put the math in front of people that they understand it. And so our position here is we're mindful of the past, we're reminded of it every day, but also to let people know that whether it was a George Wallace or a Lester Maddox or Donald Trump, they're all in the same line. And so for people who would say, well, I would have never allowed that to happen back then. Well, you allowed it to happen in the last 4 years.
Right.
He just was in a suit. They was from a big city. But as we know, racism knows no geographic boundaries. Prejudice and bigotry knows none of those things. And so what we are trying to do here in Montgomery is to say, yes, we want to be unified. We want to heal, but there's got to be some atonement first. And so we've got to take care of that part, and we aren't there yet. And so that's the conversation that we're having, and that's how we're approaching our leadership, and how we're trying to, really keep this in the forefront of how we move forward together as a community, but understanding the history that many of us in this panel have talked about and have learned about through oral history, our family members and so forth, and try to share that with a larger community in terms of why these things are important and why it's important that it not just be us who has to speak out, as I reminded a colleague last week, that no, it has to be you. And if you read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, when he called out the white Christian leaders there who called him the agitator, it has to be a reminder of, again, this isn't brand new. This is just coming back again. And if you want to put it in hip hop language, it's just a remix. It's a different form, different speed, a little different sound,
well put.
but it's the same thing.
Well put. Then I'm going to go give a question to Mayor Tubbs. Does anyone want to just add anything on this extremism point?
Just one point.
Go ahead.
Derek. So I see it as two things happened on January 6th. It's the obvious what we saw on the TV, and that was an insurrection. But remember what they were protesting. They were protesting Black votes. They were contesting Philly, Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, only certain areas of the country. And that somehow we had stolen an election as Black people, notwithstanding every possible barrier that was placed in front of us, including various changes in the law or attempts to stop some of those changes in the middle of a pandemic.
Yep.
Right? Why are we having an argument about people voting by mail when we're basically all supposed to stay in the house? Why are we having that fight? Why? I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever unless you're trying to do something. So the folks who came to the Capitol on the 6th were there protesting out of the big lie that these Black votes were not legitimate. This was a massive attempt at a different form, as Mayor Reed said, this is a remix on voter suppression.
Yep.
Lastly, the difference in treatment. if Black Lives Matter had thought about, if there was an email talking about going up the steps of the Capitol, folks would have been hurt, if not shot.
Would have been a fortress around it in the beginning.
From jump,
got through.
from jump, right? But then once they breached the Capitol, and the guys carrying a Confederate flag, which has never happened in the history of the Capitol of the United States of America.
Come on in.
They then walked out as if they had just been on a tour by some tour guides.
Wow.
As opposed to every person there should have been arrested on the ground, zip tied, back, hand behind your back, and we're gonna lift you up and put you in the van and take you away.
With their own zip ties, I might add.
Oh, absolutely, right?
'Cause they
Now
brought
the
them
FBI
to-
is running around the country trying to find all these folks who, because of their privilege, were dumb enough to post their videos of their crimes on social media. We were protesting Black people being killed. They were protesting about a lie that for which there's no evidence whatsoever, that they lost every case in court, some of the judges appointed by Donald Trump. This is what happened on January 6th.
I think those are powerful points. And you mentioned Black Lives Matter, and there were a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Mayor Tubbs this to start, and others can jump in, about your engagement with the Black Lives Matter movement. The question is, what do you all as mayors think about engaging with the Black Lives Matter movement? From your perspectives, what is it important to be engaged with that community? What's the significance of messaging does it send when you are heavily engaged on such an important issue as this? Mayor Tubbs, did you have as mayor, what's your thoughts about engaging with Black Lives Matter, embracing, working shoulder to shoulder? How did you approach that?
No, I think it's a great question. And it was an interesting one for me because I started out as an activist organizing. My first action in college was demanding the Palo Alto police chief be fired for racial profiling as a freshman. I was on the freeway protesting Michael Brown as a councilman. So when we talk about sort of activism and advocacy, that's something I was organizing Occupy Stanford protests as a senior in college. So that's sort of my worldview and background I come from. But again, as mayor is different. And I think some of the conversation was with my folks is that, and I think you mentioned, Mayor Reed, this is a team. So we may all agree on the goal, but our tactics have to be different. And I would meet with the Black Lives Matter folks in my city, many of whom were mentees of mine or young people that had interned for me, or I had taught, or I had given scholarships to, so I knew who they were. And I would tell them, like, look, I'm the mayor of the entire city. So if I'm out at every one of your protests every day this month in the midst of a health pandemic, A, I put myself at risk for COVID. I'm not going to do that. And B, someone needs to be in conversation with the police chief and with the elected officials to kind of move the policy. And I told him, I said, so like what you're doing is important. You're creating an air cover for me to push policy. If the policy is not being pushed and hold me accountable, but there's no real value in me going out every day this month and protesting. When I need to be in this room with this police chief creating a civilian review board. Where I need to be in this room talking to the governor about sort of what and translating what's happening. So I know for some of the folks in the community, they were a little bit upset because I think they expected me to go out and kind of lead protests and lead rallies. And I would tell them I would have felt differently if it was a Stockton specific protest. But since we're talking about a structural issue that was nationwide, I felt it was more appropriate in my role as mayor to play the policymaker sort of advocate role inside and allow my activists to do their thing and make sure that, I'm sorry, baby, and to make sure that when folks were protesting in the city, they're given the space to do so. So I'm incredibly proud because in Stockton, we had no riots, no tear gas, no rubber bullets. I think part of it is because I had my friends texting me on the front line, sending me selfies and pictures from the police chief side and from the organizing side, just so I had an idea of what was going on. And folks, just made it very clear where I stood. Like I didn't go out and condemn folks for protesting. I just said, look, let's protest, but we don't. And again, I get the philosophical point, but as the mayor, I don't want my buildings being tore up. I don't want Black people being gunned by police anywhere in the country. That's unacceptable. And I also don't want my stores boarded up and beat up, particularly if nothing happened here. So that was also a conversation we would have to have. Like, look, as the mayor of your city, I want to make sure your city looks good after this protest, and we can rage and be upset. But we're talking about 400 years of a history. That's not going to be solved with one march anyway. And I think the last thing I would say, Derek, and I know we're running close to time, is that I would also have a lot of talk with the organizers about the difference between a moment and a movement, and that a protest is a tactic and not a strategy. So I would say, okay, we're protesting, but what's the strategy? Like, what's this the plan? A tactic. This is one tool in the arsenal. And people get frustrated with me with that, particularly for people whose first time, particularly no offense for non-Black people. And those are some of the harshest critics, non-Black people who are protesting Black Lives Matter and try to educate me on being Black in America and the value of Black lives and the culpability of the state. And I'm like, just because you're protesting and taking selfies in the middle of the street doesn't mean you're more equal. Like, what's your strategy? Like, what do you want me to do as mayor? And I think what I'm trying to do now that I'm not mayor is to give some of this game to folks to go, okay, after the protest, this is how you engage with the elected officials to get some things moved while you're still protesting.
I want to see if anyone has something either to add on that, because I think it's a very strong answer. And so, not one that everyone may have expected. People might have expected you to say, yeah, I'm out protesting right there. But does anyone have anything to add, or maybe a different view as to how you deal with the Black Lives Matter movement and where you are on that?
Jump in, and I'm going to piggyback, about what Tubbs said. I think it was important that we engage with the protesters in the moment, to go out and hear the frustration. And to be accountable for it, and to acknowledge what our role was in it. And for us, that resulted in us being the only city in Alabama where we didn't have any tear gas or rubber bullets, any violent confrontations, no property damage, anything like that. Much like what Mayor Tubbs is describing in Stockton. And I think it's important that if you have the relationship, look. If the streets know you, if the streets have some appreciation that you are doing what you can and you are authentic, there's going to be more credibility to what your words are and the actions that you take. And I think that because of our position, our police chief, as well as myself, there was an understanding, and when we were talking with, not at, the leaders and the activists and the protesters in it. And it was from a position of respect, because again, I can't be in Montgomery, Alabama. And I don't know if any of us could be in Black leaders and not understand the power of the protest movement. That's how we got many of where we are, was founded in that. And so I think for many of us, that was a asset, if you will, to be able to hear. And then, as Mayor Tubbs asked, we followed up. We followed up immediately after that to say, okay, what do you want? What do you want so that the next time this happens, we are not here? What is your goal and objective? Hold me accountable for that, and let's continue to move forward. So it's not just us venting our frustration, anger, without a positive outcome that we can point to and say that this is what we drove and this is what we made happen.
And you know what, Derek, what I can say is someone who has been in the mayor's seat and who's now on the street protesting on occasions, certainly this summer, and then most recently with Ajanette Young, is that there always has to be a strategy policy session after the protest. And so I'm always asking, okay, all right, got you on the protest. I'm going to make my sign. But when do we start creating policy and sitting down with the mayor, sitting down with the police superintendent, sitting down with other community-based organizations to create lasting change?
Yep. Well, let me ask you all. You just want to jump in real quick, and I'm going to have one closing question.
On Mayor Freeman-Wilson's point, there's a lot of discussion about certainly police departments, reform, funding, moving funding, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing I encourage folks to do is, whether it's with the police or the whole rest of the budget, look at the budget, understand the budget, see where the dollars are going. And then, in addition to talking about we want to move dollars around, but also come with a plan. We want $10 million to go from here to here for this particular purpose and reason. And understand that for most mayors, right, it is a zero-sum game. If I'm taking this $10 million from here and putting it over here, that means I'm going to have $10 million less
That's right.
for this department or agency. So what are you prepared to give up in order to have what you want? And those are hard discussions. It's not unlimited funding here.
Right. So let me ask, this is fantastic. And I want to close with this question for each of you to respond to. We have a lot of, this is being sponsored by the Harris School of Public Policy. What's clear to everyone tonight is you four tremendous leaders of your cities and in the nation. And a theme of some of the questioning that has come in here has been around, what is the source of your personal strength that helps you to lead? And what I would do is a little bit of spin and ask you to, if you could just speak to the young leaders who are aspiring to be the mayors in the future that are watching tonight. Do you have what advice would you give young leaders who are thinking about politics, leadership, becoming people like yourselves who may be listening tonight? We'll start with Mayor Wilson.
The first thing that I would point to is my faith. You've got two choices when you are a mayor. You can either drink or pray. I chose to pray. I drank a little, but
yeah, I was going to say, can't you do both?
I did both.
I'm saying
why is that a binary choice?
I'm saying primarily.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I would say is that, especially as we begin Black History Month, I am so blessed to stand on the shoulders of a Mayor Richard Gordon Hatcher, of a Carl Stokes, of a Mayor Maynard Jackson. And then to have come into office and to have one of the first calls I received to be from a Mayor Michael Nutter to say, hey, I just want to help you be successful. Here's my cell number. You can call me anytime, and mean it, because when I called it, he answered. That is just priceless. And so what I would say to the next generation of mayors, and what I've said to Tubbs and to Reed and to the guys who have come and women who have come after me, is to lean on your colleagues, whether they are in or out of office, because there really is nothing new under the sun. And you don't have to worry about hearing anybody say on the 10 o'clock news or 11 o'clock, depending on which time zone you're in. Mayor called me and asked me the question, and this is what I told him. That's not how we roll. So really to utilize your colleagues, and I would say certainly the Black mayors, but I would say all mayors, and that's the comes from really being in that fraternity of mayors, or in sorority, I would say.
Thank you. Mayor Reed, same question. What would you advice for the next generation?
I would say certainly what Mayor Freeman-Wilson mentioned, you got to have faith. You got to stick close to that. I think you have to have a value system, if you will, and understand the why. Why do you want to be in this position in whatever community you may be in? If the why comes back to me more than it does we, then it's probably not the best position for you. I think it's important that we understand that, and young leaders understand that you don't have to have all the answers. None of us do. Don't have to be perfect. None of us are. You just have to be committed and willing to make bold and courageous change for the people that you represent. And if you're willing to do that, there are enough people who will mentor you, shadow you, escort you, whatever it may be, lift you up, give you a hug, all those things to get you to a positive space in your leadership. Doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't happen just because you're a Facebook philosopher, or just because you got an IG crowd telling you to go on. It has to be deeper than that and more substantive than that. And if you understand the why, and you have a value system that's rooted in a level of unselfishness, that's rooted in a level of trying to do right by people, that's guided by your faith, then you're in the best position you can be in.
Thank you. Mayor Nutter, same question to you. Advice for the future.
So everything that my colleagues have said, but for the young people, part of it is, just do your best in school. As grandmother used to say, boy, get that education, nobody can take it away from you, right? So those are important lessons. Your friendships, your relationships, your family, critically important. Public service takes its toll, but you might be in office or aspiring for office, but your family serves with you. You're going to miss a few things, right? And so, the strength of my wife and daughter around me, my son, encouraging and supporting when there were no voices out there. I wasn't, got my share of accolades. I wasn't always who I am, right? It wasn't always wonderful. And having that support around. And then, you're going to meet people in college, you're going to meet people after, or grad school, or whatever the case may be. Stay in touch with folks. That's going to be your network. That's like, what's that? Was that Verizon, right? When all the people stand, right? You need a network. And those friendships and relationships, high school, college, jobs I've had, people came out of wherever, right? Because they say, oh, this guy's doing this, has credibility. Let's be with him. So I think creating that network, and as Mayor Reed said, it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the people that you want to serve, and people know whether you're authentic or not.
Oh, fantastic. Mayor Tubbs, I'm going to let you have the last word to close us out. And again, at the time when you were elected, you were the youngest mayor in the country. So you were the present and the future in a way at the same time.
Still is.
It's still, yeah,
Still is.
right. Got a whole lot of runway.
Still is.
For sure.
We'll have you have the last word on advice for that next generation.
Well, I think again, and Mayor Freeman-Wilson mentioned it, but I remember being a mayor when I was first elected and having folks like Mayor Freeman-Wilson, who was like president of the National League of Cities, having someone like Mayor Michael Nutter, who was America's mayor. When I remember being an intern in the White House and having to write briefs about what he was doing in Philadelphia for President Obama. And just to have them reaching out and to treat me as an equal and to give so much free game was such a blessing. So I think oftentimes people think politics is a zero-sum game, but it's not. And you want to build relationships and real relationships with people you look up to, with people who have done what you want to do, and people who are doing what you're doing in a way that feels very collaborative. And then Mayor Reed said, and I agree 100%, that part of the issues we have in our politics today is that so many people are running to be something versus doing something, right? So it's about, what do you want to get done? What do you want to do? It's not about the position. It's really about purpose and the why. And the last thing I think, and this is as someone who just lost re-election, so it's particularly resonant, but get involved and be so laser focused on something that you're willing to lose for. You might not always lose, you might win, but you should have one thing, you should have a guiding North Star. It's like, no matter what, even if it costs me a re-election, this is what I am dedicated, I'm willing to lose for. Because I think that will allow you to be bold and forward thinking, to really govern with principles. Because again, there's many political offices, there's an election for something every other year. So if you don't get it this time, you get it next time, or maybe take a, like, and then also you don't have to be in politics to make an impact. Like my biggest heroes are not politicians. Like my biggest living inspiration besides my mother, grandmother, and aunt is Marion Wright Elderman, who is the founder of Children's Defense Fund. So I think those would be my, and then also my grandma always says, don't despise small beginnings because the Lord loves to see the work begin. So to get to be mayor, you have to start as intern, you have to start as volunteer, even with your University of Chicago degree, you have to start somewhere. And I think it's in those, without the limelight, without the platform, that you gain the principles and the skills, you get a chance to mess up and learn. And that will equip you for when you're ready to be mayor or governor or president or whatever it is that you're supposed to be.
Terrific. Well, look, I want to thank you all again, Mayor Freeman-Wilson, Mayor Reed, Mayor Nutter, Mayor Tubbs. This has been a tremendous panel. The feedback from the questions have been very positive. People really appreciated it. And it's a delight to have a window into the thinking of such effective people in our country. And on behalf of the University of Chicago and the Harris School and Dean Baker, who I want to give a lot of props to for the idea of putting on this Black History Month series, as well as the African American Mayors Association who partnered with us. We want to thank everyone for joining. We want to thank the mayors for participating, and we wish you all the best. Have a wonderful Black History Month. Thank you again.
Thanks, Derek. Thank you all.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Reed, Mayor Tubbs, Mayor Freeman-Wilson.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Always great to serve with you all. Thanks, Derek.
Absolutely.
Take care now. We'll see you.
See you guys. Be good.
Bye-bye.
Okay.